I got to start with the obvious thing. How surprised were you by the news of Craig Counsell being poached by the Cubs, leaving Milwaukee for the record-setting contract for a manager?
Well, once Bob Nightingale said it was going to be the Mets or the Brewers, I knew it wasn't going to be those two. So it was just a matter of figuring out which of the other jobs he would take. I give the Cubs some credit here. I mean, last winter they went out. I loved their winter, but they did get back on the, hey, we're a big market team that can spend money. And they did the same thing here. They said, you know what, we can pay the highest salary ever for a manager to get the guy we actually want. And recognizing that, even though David Ross had navigated this team to an above 500 season for the first time in a while, that he had squeezed a lot out of his pitching staff, you can do better. So I give the Cubs full credit. I was surprised. I never thought he was coming to New York, just because every vibe I've ever gotten from Craig Counsell was that he was going to stay in the middle of the country. He just always seemed to me like somebody who was going to find a job somewhere between Fifth Avenue and Rodeo Drive. He didn't seem like a guy who was going to come to a coast. I thought that would mean staying in Milwaukee, so that part did surprise me. But I give full credit to the Cubs, and I'm really excited. Counsell's done a really good job with the Brewers, with the limitations that the Brewers have. He's now going to an organization that pretty good team in place, has a lot of talent, young talent coming through. It seems to be willing to go out and spend money to add to it. So, just going from the Brewers to the Cubs, that's probably a 4-win difference. I mean, who knows who the Brewers will hire right now, but Counsell is an upgrade on Ross, and the Brewers losing Counsell is going to cost them. So right there alone, the Cubs have made up some of the ground that they were behind the Brewers this year.
I was mentioning earlier, Counsell's first full season was 2016. So from 2016 through 2023, and keep in mind, you know this, but that includes the Cubs World Championship year. He had a better record than the Cubs. The Brewers had a better record than the Cubs. They had a better record than the Cardinals. The Cardinals spent, in terms of 26-man payroll over those 8 seasons, the Cardinals spent about $420 million more than the Brewers. And the Cubs spent about $550 million more than the Brewers. So Craig Counsell still was able to win more games than those other two teams did. And now he's going to Chicago, where that big financial war chest awaits him. Not that they're going to go Steve Cohen here or anything. But, yeah, you don't hire Counsell and pay him that money unless you have pretty big plans. You agree?
Yeah, I would expect them to go out and spend some money on starting pitching this winter. And like I say, they've got enough talent internally that they can, the business and talk about them trying to trade for Juan Soto. They can put together a package of prospects to go out and get, a big left-handed bat. They're probably going to lose Bellinger. Maybe they retain Bellinger. That's another way they could spend their money. But I think the days, that weird period of the Cubs, 20 through 22, where they kind of acted more like the White Sox, I think that's definitely over. I'll also say, seeing a lot of frustration with Mark Adonasio, the Brewers owner. The guy left to become the highest paid manager ever. I mean, if that's going to be the standard, that you had to make him the highest paid manager ever, I don't know that you can really get on the Brewers necessarily for not doing that. And Counsell had seemed like he was on his way out of Milwaukee at times. Like he let his contract expire. He wanted to be a free agent. I don't necessarily can put this on the Brewers. Adonasio went out, 6 years ago now, traded for Christian Yelich, signed Lorenzo Cain. They've run payrolls disproportionate to their market, their revenues, and they, like a lot of the teams that rely heavily on attendance, got hurt by 2020 and 2021. So I don't think this is on Adonasio, and we'll see what the other steps they take going forward here. Matt Arnold is an excellent GM. I think he's in position now to go out and hire the guy that's going to be there for the next 10 years. The trick is to go out and find the next Craig Counsell.
Joe Sheehan, I was really looking forward to talking to you, as I always am, but I had a specific thing in mind. Because Peter Gammons had a thing on X or Twitter, hearing that there's a chance Heimblum would maybe join the Cardinals as an advisor. The Cardinals didn't shoot that down; they just tried to dodge it for now. I don't know what the chances of that happening, but I've always been impressed with him, especially with Tampa Bay, and I realize the situation in Boston is always kind of going to be not a mess, but just constant back and forth, mixed messages and all that stuff. So I didn't really blame him for anything that went wrong there. And I know you know him, and I know you think highly of him, but I wanted to ask you this. Just tell us something about him in terms of the baseball man that he is. And if he joined any team as an advisor, this one, but what others, like what kind of things could he bring to that role that would help a team like the Cardinals specifically, or any other team for that matter?
He's meticulous. That's the one thing, the first thing that comes to mind about Chaim, whether in Tampa Bay or in Boston. I know he got some pushback because of his meticulousness with the Red Sox. He's somebody who, he and I disagree on some things. For people who don't know, Chaim was an intern at Baseball Prospectus back in the 2000s when I was there. He worked under me, and then he went to Tampa Bay and, eventually became the Red Sox GM. What I would say is, even though he comes out of that stat head, that think tank environment at Prospectus, through working in the game for 15 years, he's actually got more feel than I think people give him credit for. Certainly that was one of the issues in Boston, people kind of seeing him as more of a stat head automaton. But, we have a lot. I was sitting down with him last year and, talking about just, things where we disagree, just the value of a closer, just to pick an idea. He really has more feel than I think he gets credit for. So as far as like that blend of being able to do the analysis, being able to work the problem, and then also having an understanding that this is real people involved, Chaim to me has that balance. And I said, 4 years ago when he got the Red Sox job, I thought it was going to work out really well. Obviously, forced to trade Mookie Betts. Force is the wrong word, but he traded Mookie Betts. And then having to deal with the pandemic, and that really set all of the things he wanted to do up there back of it in terms of hiring people. And, remember, in the first, 20 months that he was in that job, he made 5 draft picks. And to me, he just never got the opportunity to see all the process through. I don't think the pandemic year was enough a part of that story in Boston. Chaim was hired right at the end of 2019, but effectively he couldn't really start the job until like 2021. And that to me was a big part of what went wrong in Boston. The pandemic year kind of screwing everything up.
And I was doing some reading, and I know in Tampa Bay he received I don't know what the word is, acclaim, credit. You know what I'm talking about for his work specifically in terms of pitching, how to develop pitchers, how to find a way to make them at their best and all that good stuff. That's something, by the way, as you know, the Cardinals have not only had a real problem with in recent years, but they acknowledge it and say that they're going to have to make some changes. So in your opinion, is Chaim Bloom really adept in the pitching area, which happens to be where the Cardinals probably need the most guidance right now, if in fact that he would come here?
If you go back to the early parts of the 2010s, a lot of the stuff was pretty new. And I think Chaim will tell you, they weren't necessarily on top of it in Tampa Bay. And it wasn't until the middle of the decade, you go to 15, 16, that the Rays started to become the Rays in terms of using technology, using techniques, identifying pitchers who could work in their system and making them better. The Rays that we know today, where they trade for, Robert Stevenson, who's been with 4 teams in 3 years, and all of a sudden he becomes a wipeout reliever. That process didn't come about until about 5-6 years ago, and Chaim was a huge part of putting that together in Tampa Bay. And when he got to Boston, he's slowly been implementing this, and I mentioned the pandemic as being a barrier here. It takes a long time, and you're going to go through this in St. Louis now. I know Dusty Blake, if I have the name right. He's working on this now, but it takes years to get people, processes, and tech all in place to make these changes. And it's not like you would just suddenly then pick up 5 pitchers and 2 of them become awesome. It takes time to get, to actually work the system and then figure out what works and what doesn't. We become like Premier Soccer League fans here in the States, where we expect teams to change on a dime. Oh, well, now you got a pitching lab. Where are all the pitchers? I think Chaim ran into this problem in Boston. I think if Cardinals fans expect this to be an overnight process, I think the Cardinals are going to have this problem too. You've got to give the front office, got to give Blake time to put all this together. It takes longer than everybody thinks it does, because we don't see the beginning of the process. the Cardinals are talking about it now, but for a lot of these teams, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Rays, the ones that we think of as being really good at inventing these pitchers, they were putting those processes in place 5-6 years ago. And they've only started to see the production out of it, in the last 2 or 3 years. So you've got that long lead time. So you actually see results of the program. And, patience is essential. And listen, some owners are perfectly willing to write the checks and get out of the way. And I think you have to be that type of owner when it's not just signing a great free agent or, drafting the first pick in the draft. When you're putting in these long-term processes in place, you have to give your people time.
Joe, final thing. Did you make the young Chaim Bloom, did you make his life miserable when he was an intern working under you? Are you kidding me? I can't even conceive that. I can't even imagine the horror. I'm
charming. I'm an absolute delight. I don't really remember. I was like, I can't even tell you. Like, sometimes I was running the site. Sometimes Christina Krall was running the site. Sometimes Nate Silver. I don't even remember back then, what years I ran the site. I will say though that there's a reason I run a sole proprietorship. I'm much better on my own than I am either working under anybody else or working above anybody else. Not because I'm a jerk. I'm very set in my ways. So there's a reason I have the career that I have, and I have all kinds of respect, for friends of mine who are at The Athletic or at newspapers or at magazines who are very good at both managing up and down. I can do neither.
Joe Sheehan, in your newsletter today, you went through the awards and how you would pick them, and you do that every year, and I always like it because I respect your opinion so much. And I'm not sure like what the most closely or hotly debated decision is so I want to ask you that. Is it the National League MVP? Is that should that be a tight call? I mean, the votes are already in, of course. Should that be a tight call? Or was the choice relatively easy for you for the number one guy?
Yeah, it was easy by the end of the year. Mookie Betts had this incredible August that actually, for a little while, he was the more valuable player than Ronald Acuna Jr. And then Acuna versus Betts in September wasn't even close. Betts had a really poor September. So by the end of the season, you look at offense, defense, base running, all of it, Acuna had significantly better season, such that I was looking for, okay, should we be giving Betts extra credit for going to play second base in the middle of the season, for playing shortstop? And had it been closer, I think that would have been a part of the conversation. But Acuna's raw numbers and the raw performance made it so that we didn't have to look on the margins for that. I don't think that's going to be all that close in the end because of Acuna's big September. I think the more interesting conversation is probably the National League Cy Young, where you've got the traditionalist look that say, when I'm looking at awards, Bernie, I look at, quote, real runs, ERA, RA9, things like that, as opposed to looking at, say, fielding independent pitching or SIERA and things like that. What I mean is real runs in the sense of these are the runs that actually scored, as opposed to something like FIP, which is, well, this is how good the pitcher pitched, how well the pitcher pitched. I think there are two conversations happening right now. And, how much do we weight these other numbers? Because if you look at the Cy Young voting in the National League, it's Blake Snell if you're using real runs and it's not that close. And then over on the other side, though, it's Spencer Strider or Zach Gallen or Zach Wheeler. Like, there's a whole different ranking if you look at these two things. So if you emphasize FIP, Fangraphs WAR, the kind of the way they look at pitching, you're going to come up with a totally different set of answers. So I think when we see the ballots come out, it's going to be interesting to see, whether people split the difference, which happens sometimes, how people voted, whether it's ERA where you get, Logan Webb and Zach Gallen, or over here where you might get like Spencer Strider and Zach Wheeler. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. Whether it's controversial or not, I don't know, but that to me is most an interesting conversation to come out this year. Which people are going to use FIP and which people are going to use ERA.
Yeah, I can't wait to see that too. I'm curious as well. I just wanted to ask your opinion, and I'm gonna exclude Yamamoto from the discussion for no real reason other than maybe I have a hard time, believing the Cardinals would blow everyone else away with an offer because there's going to be some of the real big players sitting at that table. But you never know. But let's just stick with Major League pitchers right now. Of the three that are most discussed, I think, non-Ohtani, most discussed in terms of free agent starting pitchers. You mentioned Snell, of course, Aaron Nola, Sonny Gray. At least locally, I think locally here, Nola and Gray get more, kind of more buzz, generate more buzz than Snell. And again, this is not a quick and easy thing because we don't know what they're going to be offered by other teams. But just in terms of where would you put your money if you had a chance, like a market value contract? Who's the guy that would appeal to you the most?
I feel like they're all landmines. Nola, you say he's been healthy. The problem is that's always in the past, right?
Yep.
Look at all the innings that he's thrown. And it just takes – and then that's the guy who gets hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can't rely on any pitcher to be healthy. So that's his greatest asset is all of those 200-inning seasons. I just don't know if I want to bet on them. I think that's probably where I'd put my money among those three. Sonny Gray's never been a high-volume guy, and he was a different pitcher with the Twins the last couple of years, such that I don't know that I want to bet on him once he's outside of that incredible pitching program they have now. Like, are you getting Sonny Gray, or are you getting Sonny Gray without the Twins program? And those might be two different things. Blake Snell might win the NL Cy Young Award, probably will. And he had the highest walk rate of any pitcher in the American League. In fact, he had the highest, National League. He had the highest walk rate of any qualified starter in this century. I don't think I want to bet on that. So if it's among those three, I'm probably taking Nola. I think Yamamoto, is the best starter in this class. I might put Jordan Montgomery above any of the other three U.S.-based starters. He hasn't been worked very hard. He had the Tommy John 4 years ago now, so he's still in the honeymoon phase. You might be able to get him a little bit cheaper than the other guys. It's just really hard, Bernie. Remember last year? There were 9 guys who signed $100 million contracts, a couple of pitchers in DeGrom and Carlos Rodon. DeGrom and Carlos Rodon combined for 22 starts last year. I don't even think that. If we can't go out and sign Jacob DeGrom and Carlos Rodon and get our money's worth, do we trust that we can sign Nola or Snell or Gray and get our money's worth? I'm pro paying the players, but I think I look at last year's market and I'm like, what are we really getting for the money? I mean, can you really buy any pitcher at market value and expect to get return?
No, I agree, and the Cardinals are really in a pickle in that area because this is a really bad time to be in such a desperate situation for starting pitching, and I can predict what will happen. They may ascertain. They may look at some guys like a little bit lower on the list that aren't creating the buzz. Probably you can get at a lower price. And if they sign a couple of those guys, and by the way, I don't even know who I'm talking about, but there's always going to be guys on the lower end that represent good value. And if your judgments on point. But if they do that, if they go that way, there's Cardinals fans are going to be screaming, "Oh, see, they're cheap again. See, they wouldn't go after the big guys." And I got mixed feelings on that because I would like to see them raise their payroll. I think in this time when you're desperate for starting pitching, and you, meaning John Mozeliak, came out publicly 2-3 times, said we need 3 starting pitchers. I don't think he's talking about bums. I think he's talking about guys that'll make him better. It's going to cost a lot of money, and I don't know how the Cardinals are going to be able to do that with the same payroll, which John Mozeliak indicated yesterday at the GM meetings. Their payroll will be similar to what it was last year before the trade deadline. And I'm thinking, well, I know they're going to have about like $43 million clear based on players who are no longer here, but I with that kind of budget, man, good luck shopping in the luxury aisle. I don't know.
Well, the Cardinals are in a jam, like you say. You kind of almost trapped. You're going to have to make a bet on one of these guys. Trust your scouts, trust your analysts, and pick one. Is kind of where they're going to be at. But for any fan that's kind of going crazy about they have to do X, Y, Z, I'm just going to look back again at the DeGrom and Rodon contracts. Anybody who insists, and I think we talked about this like in May. Cardinals fans were up in arms about, they didn't sign any starting pitching. Okay, would you like to have signed Carlos Rodon? Because that was the guy you would have wanted in February. and he didn't pitch until July. So, you really got to you got to look at the reality of the situation. I agree with you, though. I think the other thing is the trade. I mean, this is probably Mozeliak's, I don't want to say it's his Waterloo's not the word I'm looking for. His Alamo, where he's got to make a stand here and figure out among all of the position players that they have that couldn't get on the field last year, and then some of them got hurt. Pick the guys you're going to go forward with and take the rest and try to get the best starting pitcher you can for him. I'm a big Dylan Carlson fan. Obviously, his value is down. But, if Carlson's playing 3 times a week for the Cardinals next year, it's a huge mistake. If you're not going to play him 162 games next year, you got to trade him. Same for, Donovan's coming off an injury. If it's Tyler O'Neill, figure out who your starters are and then use the rest of them to get to trade for starting pitching. And I'm not talking about number 3s there. I'm saying try to find somebody who's going to give you a number 1 or a number 2. Okay, you're not getting a number 1 for Dylan Carlson. But, do you have to put Nolan Gorman? I love Nolan Gorman. Do you have to put him out there to try to get, a Logan Gilbert or somebody like that? I don't think they can do this entirely through free agency. I think there's going to have to be one very big baseball trade, not a money trade, but a baseball trade where we're trading you a good young player and you're going to give us back a good young pitcher and we'll see what happens.
And their timing on that part of it is actually really good because it's a very thin position player market, as you know. It really is. If you're looking for an infielder, best of luck, there's just not much there. Talking about free agency, and I'm not sure about the outfield market, but again, everything I've read from people that I respect indicate, going to be a tough off season to look for position player help, especially the infield. Well, the Cardinals have, they have a lot of those guys. I'm sure there'd be a pretty good market for Brendan Donovan. I'm sure there'd be a really good market for Gorman, given his age and power, and also the fact the guy played solidly at second base last year. Tommy Edman, who, listen, he's mediocre against right-handed pitching, but he's a plus defender at like 3 positions. So you can move him around as a chess piece. He's a switch hitter. He's got great speed, steals bases, but he just runs the bases really well. You could, I think there would be some value with him. How much, is the question. But, and they do have young outfielders, and so they do have position players to trade. And it's just the matter of maybe you pick the one that you're willing to trade, and you just kind of take a deep breath and hope it doesn't turn into something you're going to regret in a couple of years. I don't know. But they have the means to make a trade. I don't think there's any doubt about that for pitching.
Well, also, do you put, if you're not going to make Ivan Herrera the catcher, doesn't he have to become trade bait? If
Yes.
you are going to make Ivan Herrera the catcher, do you look at Contreras as your long-term first baseman and trade Goldschmidt? I know Dave Perry's made some really good arguments. He runs a newsletter called Birdie Work.
Birdie Work, it's great. Yeah, it's great.
And he's made the argument that Goldschmidt hit in bad luck last year, that maybe he's not in decline, which is all fine. But when I look at this roster, I'm like, can I trade Goldschmidt for a comparable starting pitcher, which is to say somebody who might be older, might be a little more expensive, but could fill that number 2 spot for a year? And then, figure out first base. You can always figure out first base. First base is the easiest thing to figure out. So maybe that's your answer. Maybe Alec Burleson ends up, trying to play some first base. But I think the catcher thing is important because either Herrera's your catcher or Herrera's got to be traded. You can't have another year where he gets like 78 at-bats and kind of in this in-between thing. I think they've got to make that decision. And I'm not even talking about like the early season controversy about Contreras. I'm just saying, figure out what Herrera is, or is he going to be one of these guys that goes for a trade show? Bernie, you look at the 30 teams, and some of them are just not going to do anything because that's the way it is now. And some of them are always going to be involved. But for me, one of the 5 most interesting teams this winter is the Cardinals because of their opportunity to go in a lot of different directions. They could sign free agents. They could make interesting trades. And the pressure, as you mentioned, that's on John Mozeliak after the worst Cardinals year since, 18-6 or whatever it was?
Well, for the worst season since 1990, but the 4th worst winning percentage they've had in 77 seasons, the last 77 seasons.
It's a fascinating winter.
When I looked that up, because I knew we'd go way back. I mean, it went. Remember, the Cardinals won 3 World Series in the 40s, and the last one coming in 46. Well, since 1947, there have been 77 seasons of baseball. This was the 4th worst record they've had in those 77 years, going back to the start of the 1947 season. I mean, if you're the Cardinals and you've could have established this long, success. They've had some gaps, but they've been consistently pretty damn good, if not better, for a long time. And you're down 4 from the bottom of 77 seasons. Yeah, that's a disastrous year, and there's a lot of things to fix. So, I agree with you. Needless to say, 100%. Absolutely fascinating to see what it's going to look like when we get. I don't know. Name an arbitrary date. We get to February 1st or something like that. I don't know. It's going to be really, really interesting. Joe, loved it, man.
Winter meetings are 4 weeks out.
Oh, that's right. Joe Sheehan newsletter. Go to joesheehan.com and take a look at some of the free samples. Listen, he's cranking out stuff all winter long. It's great. I look forward to it every day. I know when moves are going to be made, he's going to have instant analysis of just about instant analysis of everything that goes down, moves he likes, moves he doesn't like. He'll question things, just look at it from every angle and tell you what he thinks. So this is a great time, especially with the Cardinals having this will be one of their impactful off seasons, most impactful off seasons they've had in a long time, for better or for worse. And you're going to want to stay on top of things through Joe Sheehan. So, Joe, the best way for them to subscribe, and we're making that pitch again. We hope that they do and support your work because it's invaluable to me, and you're also very kind by coming on the show every week. What's the best way for them to get the newsletter?
Go to joesheehan.com. You'll get all the subscription information there. There's actually a free piece up there right now that I sent out last Friday, kind of closing out the playoffs, and but it was really well received about what I call the second chance issue. Some of the things we were talking about over the last month about some of the upsets, what we saw. I think it's a really interesting piece. I hope people will check it out and then continue on, go through the archive, and then subscribe for which should be a really interesting winter. joesheehan.com.
Joe, thanks so much. Looking forward to talking to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bert. Thanks, Bert.
That's our friend Joe Sheehan. We had a good long conversation there.